Welcome to the Galloway Show, the no-budget television every Wednesday night until the 12th of October, when we will have, God willing, the return of the mother of all talk shows, midweek special. Now, it's the very worst night to have to pre-record the show. But I'm on holiday, you see, and the technical capability that we have from my holiday residence has not got enough internet to sustain a live broadcast. So my apologies for that. But I couldn't cancel it because there's just so much happening. And of course, I'll take your calls and your feedback on Sunday on the mother of all talk shows at 7 o'clock UK time on Sunday evening. What's that sound? It's distant laughter from the Kremlin. You could not make this up. The Western leaders that declared war on Russia, military war as well as economic war, are now going down like ninepins. Some of them are already politically dead and others are at death's door. I could spend a lot of time, but I don't have it, adumbrating the collapse of the Western political class. Draghi, the Italian prime minister, having to flee Madrid and the NATO meeting in order to get back to Italy, because like some old Commonwealth leader in decades gone by, as soon as he was out of his own country of Italy, a rising began that might well have left him in exile and deposed. The Italian government is not much longer for this world. And I'm not sure about the government of the Netherlands either. Mark Rutte, the Blairite Prime Minister of the Netherlands, has now got his security forces shooting his own farmers. Because the farmers, militant farmers, yes, in the Netherlands, that's right, are on the streets in their thousands and with their tractors and their agricultural machinery and, crucially, with their horse manure, which they are dumping absolutely fittingly in the doorways of government buildings. They have blockaded the Netherlands from neighboring countries. They have blockaded the highways and motorways. They are absolutely up in arms. Rutte's submission to yet another green policy dictated from Brussels next door and the European Union. If I could have, I'd have put heavy quotation marks around green. If I tell you that it will not be until you've done 60,000 miles in your electric car that it will make any contribution at all to your carbon footprint, because it takes 60,000 miles to make up for the depredation to the environment caused by the making and the charging of that electric phone, of that electric car. Do you get my drift? Things aren't always what they seem to be. And so the anti-farmer, anti-meat, anti-cow policies of the European Union, and indeed other Western governments, means unemployment for the Netherlands farmers. It means poverty for them. And it means diminution in the freedom of choice of the rest of us in the Netherlands. Some of us don't want to eat grasshoppers. Some of us want to eat a nice steak, Angus beef burger, whether the cow is farting or not, because we don't believe that in a world where the American military is by far and away the biggest polluter on the planet, that us having a cheeseburger is going to make very much difference. It will not add up to a row of beans, if you will allow me to mix that gaseous metaphor. So Rutte is in very big trouble. It may very well be that his Blairite government in the Netherlands and Draghi's Blairite government in Italy will both fall. Macron has already lost his majority. Joe Biden has already lost his marbles, his mind. Joe Biden is haunting the corridors of the White House, having buttoned up wrongly his dressing gown and pajamas, searching for a lavatory before he soils himself. Oh, sorry, too late, as the Pope found out. So Macron's lost his majority, Biden's lost his marbles, and that brings me to Boris Johnson. I can hardly wipe the smile from my face. It couldn't happen to a nicer fellow. Indeed, as Oscar Wilde put it upon the death scene in Charles Dickens' Little Nell, looking at Boris Johnson's fate, you'd need a heart of stone not to laugh. Boris Johnson, who demanded that Putin must go, who earlier demanded that Assad must go, is in fact the one who is going to be going. Now, bear in mind the caveat that this is pre-recorded around about 8:30 this evening. It may very well be that by the time you watch this, he's already gone, but I doubt it. I doubt it, and I'll come to why I doubt it in just a moment or two. But that distant laughter in the Kremlin is undoubtedly because as President Putin looks across the array of the enemies that promised to bring him down and looks across the economic terrain at the very dangerous levels of collapse of several Western economies, he must be shaking his head ruefully. He must be saying, I told you so, that this would turn out to be a boomerang, that the blowback from what you are doing will harm you far more than it will harm the Russians, that it will be that great big stone that the Western leaders struggled to pick up only to drop it on their own feet. But allow me to segue to Westminster, to Downing Street, where some of the most extraordinary events, not in recent British political history, but in all British political history, there has never been a day like today. Literally, never. Boris Johnson has suffered 40 resignations in a single day, and there will be more by the time you see this, and there will be more by the time we all retire to bed, and there'll be more again tomorrow. It's the biggest number of resignations in a single day. In fact, never mind a single day, it's the biggest number of resignations ever suffered by any British government at any time. Almost 40 people who were in power yesterday have voluntarily left Boris Johnson up the Yangtze without a paddle. And you can't say that he doesn't deserve it. You can't say that his judgment in one damn thing after another, to borrow a phrase of the late Harold Macmillan, one of his predecessors as a Conservative Prime Minister. Macmillan said it's never one damn thing, it's one damn thing after another. And with Boris Johnson, that is exactly what it has been. When I look back now, of course, the history will look back more intensely. The beginning of the end for Boris Johnson was the day he chose Carrie Johnson, his wife, over Dominic Cummings, his political wife, the man that he had relied on, his right hand during all the scheming years that he planned to become the Prime Minister of Britain. They were indistinguishable. They were two peas in a pod. They were Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but Carrie didn't like him. And Dominic Cummings didn't like her. Forced to choose, Johnson chose his wife. and ignominiously kicked Dominic Cummings out of the Downing Street door carrying a cardboard box. And it's what was in that cardboard box that would begin the end of Boris Johnson. Because I'm in a position to know that all the hard drives and thumbnails and whatever else you call them in that cardboard box are precisely that which has been a hemorrhage for Boris Johnson ever since. All the pictures of the parties, all the pictures of the work events that caused Boris Johnson a fine from the Metropolitan Police, a Partygate scandal that has gone on and on and on. All of that is the work of Dominic Cummings. So a very poor decision, Boris, picking Carrie over Dom. But it wasn't your last very poor decision. You went on making them one after another. I don't have time to go into them all, so let me concentrate on the one that is the proximate cause of the Prime Minister's downfall. And I refer, of course, to Pincher, or Pinch Him, as he might more properly have been called. It's not a joke, actually. Pincher was made the Deputy Chief Whip of the government by Boris Johnson, despite Boris Johnson knowing that he was a drunken, sexual predator of the worst kind, preying on young men and boys openly in public places, never mind what he would do in private. And so drunk, he could not stand up straight. So drunk, he could not say the sound of his own name. So drunk, he could not tell taxi drivers where it was he lived. So drunk that he was habitually poured into black cabs and officials paying the fare in advance and telling the cabbie where to take him. And heaven help any young man that crossed his path, because he wouldn't just be propositioned, he would be sexually molested and allegedly sexually assaulted by a government minister, by the Deputy Chief Whip of the government. And Boris Johnson knew all of that. He knew exactly what Pincher was. And worse, he denied that he had known what Pincher was. He couldn't recall the specific detail, he said, forcing the former head of the British Civil Service, the noble Lord Macdonald, to take to the airwaves and call him a liar. The former head of the Civil Service had to tell the country that the Prime Minister was lying, that the Prime Minister had been personally briefed 2 years ago, before he made the appointment of Pincher, that he was a sexual assaulter of young men. Now, of course, he's not the only one. The chief whip of the separatist SNP is also an alleged sexual molester, groper of teenage boys. There have been many such weirdos in the British Parliament. I even knew one or two of them myself. One of them, a grand old man, shared a taxi with me, and I used to drop him off at Dolphin Square, a very famous old man, until one night he put his hand on my knee and invited me up for a drink. I told him, old boy, I don't drink, and you shouldn't either, for your health, not to mention your moral well-being. But he insisted, and I had to keep refusing ever more rudely. So there's a lot of these weirdos in politics, but they don't all get appointed as the Deputy Chief Whip by a Prime Minister who has been personally briefed about their predilections, their peccadillos, and yes, their crimes. That's what put the skids under Boris Johnson's premiership. Not even more serious things like war, famine, sickness, pestilence, and disease. All of these things should have done for Boris Johnson, but it was Pincher that finally done for him. And now we have a parade of people we have never heard of resigning from positions we didn't know they held. Did you know that Britain had a trade envoy to Angola? I didn't either. And he's a Scottish politician. He's resigned from the trade envoyship to Angola. I'm not sure how much trade we do with Angola. I'm certain that we didn't need a special envoy. And Boris Johnson is now too, because that special envoy has just resigned, joining the almost 40 people who've walked in an attempt to destroy his premiership. Some of the disloyalty has been spectacular. Priti Patel, holder of one of the three great offices of state, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, two of the three positions now held by people of colour, and every one of them, all three of them, simply ghastly, making the point that identity politics is a bit of a crock, really. Doesn't matter what the colour of the minister is. What counts is the content of their character. Anyway, Priti Patel, having been rescued by Boris Johnson from the ignominy of having been sacked by Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, because of her illegal dealings in the state of Israel when she was there on holiday, Boris Johnson forgave her and gave her one of the top jobs, and she's just repaid him by demanding that he should resign. But the conduct of Nadim Zahawi, the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, an Iraqi Kurd multi-millionaire, so rich that he charged us, the British taxpayer, thousands of pounds to heat his stables in which he kept his racehorses. The taxpayer was billed for the heating bill for his stables, for his racehorses. That's how rich he is. Only the very rich can behave with such contemptuous insouciance towards the taxpayer. Nadim Zahawi, the Iraqi Kurd, who should have been drummed out of parliament for expenses fraud, less than 24 hours after Boris Johnson appointed him as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, he marched into Downing Street demanding the resignation of Boris Johnson. Now, I mean, that's Game of Thrones stuff. I mean, that is betrayal on a biblical scale. Rishi Sunak, even richer than Nadim Zahawi, he resigned too, despite living next door to Boris Johnson in number 11 Downing Street. He didn't even lean out of the bedroom window and tell the Prime Minister that he was going to resign and presumably move house before he announced it to the media. That's the kind of people they are. They are rats abandoning a sinking ship. And God willing, that whole ship will sink, and soon. You know, the former Conservative Member of Parliament and wonderful writer in the London Times, Matthew Paris, once wrote many years ago, but I have never forgotten. He described how at the second that the rat's heart stops beating, the parasites living on and in it begin immediately to flee the corpse. Somehow they know that that was the last beat of that rat's heart, and they better get out of their fast and find another rat to fasten onto. That's what's happening this evening. These parasites, these individuals, most of whom you've never heard of, who have infested the British political scene now for 12 years of Tory government, 5 of it in coalition with the parasites of the Liberal Democrats, have sucked the blood out of the British people. They have sucked the morale out of the British people. They have sucked the color and character out of the British people, so that we are now enfeebled and afloat on the ocean wave like a cork tossing on the waves. We are lost. We have no helmsman or helmswoman. We have no direction home. This is the sloop John B., the worst trip you've ever been on. Why? Because after Boris Johnson, and he'll be gone within hours, if not within days, either by resignation or by sacking by his own members of parliament, after Boris Johnson will come no better but worse than Boris Johnson. And I speak only of the Conservative contenders for the throne, for the prime ministership. None of them will do a better job, not billionaire Rishi Sunak. He wouldn't have fared well in that taxi that I used to share with that grand old man. Not Nadeem Zahawi, the multi-millionaire racehorse owner. Not Priti Patel. Not any of the putative successors will not be better, and most of them will be markedly worse, because at least many of them have a secret agenda to take Britain back into the European Union. If not de jure, then in truth de facto, by alignment with the single market, or whatever they're going to call it. It will be effectively the betrayal of Brexit. And Michael Heseltine, Lord Heseltine, as he now is, has been very clear all evening on the television about that. No Boris, no Brexit. Get rid of Boris, then get rid of Brexit. That's what they intend to do. And I speak only of the Conservative contenders. What can I say about the leader of the opposition, so-called? Sir Keir Starmer awaits, or may already be the proud possessor of, a fine from the Durham Police Authority, which he pledged, if he received, he would resign as the leader of the opposition, as a man of honor, as a former director of public prosecutions, as a member of Her Majesty's Privy Council. If he was fined, he would resign, he said. Well, has he been fined? Or has he taken an injunction to stop us from knowing that he has been fined? Or has he been fined but intends to contest the police's decision, making a mockery of the pledge that he made? Because he said, and I quote, "If the Durham police issue me with a fine, I will resign." Well, have they issued you with a fine, Sir Keir? Are you covering it up? And in any case, what can you do better than Boris Johnson? Absolutely nothing if public opinion is to be believed. Boris Johnson, the worst prime minister in living memory, is less unpopular than you are. You and your deputy, who must also have been fined, if you have been fined, are the least popular duo since Burke and Hare, the body snatchers in Edinburgh. Mutt and Jeff, Mutt and Growler. Nobody would trust you to look after their pet dog while they went off down the shops looking for a pack of Lurpak at less than £10 that they could purchase, or looking for a gallon of petrol below £9 that they might be able to fill their car with. No, I suppose my overarching point is this. Our political class in Britain is utterly, utterly bankrupt. And the political class across the Western world, likewise. And yet, that political class has taken us to the edge of World War III. And even if World War III does not break out, they have destroyed our economies, perhaps irreparably, certainly for decades to come. And their target, the Russian Federation, is going from strength to strength. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I'm getting back to my well-deserved holiday now. If anything dramatic happens over the next few days, I might be back on the air with an emergency Galloway show. But if not, I'll see you live in a proper studio on Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time, on all platforms, taking your calls and reading out your texts and messages. It's been marvelous for me. In fact, it's been one of the happiest days of my life. Schadenfreude, moi. Good night.